As the need for an alternative to fossil fuel electrical power has increased, there has been a lot of attention focused on wind and solar power, with other zero carbon methods such as nuclear power being marginalized. Nuclear power has gotten a bad rap the past several years, with solar and wind power gets equated with being as dangerous, if not more so, than coal-producing power plants. They like to claim how many jobs it has generated, how much cheaper it is than coal or nuclear power, and how friendly it is for the environment. That all sounds well and good until you actually look a little deeper into the claims that they make. One of their biggest claims has been that solar and wind industries have added more jobs per year than coal, nuclear, and natural gas combined. What they neglect to mention is that there have been no new coal or nuclear power plants built in the last 20 years. According to the Department of Energy in August of last year, the solar wind industry had an estimated, had 110,000 total jobs in the United States. The solar industry had 243,000 jobs, while nuclear power had over 475,000 jobs. And that's ones that have not been added in up to over 20 years. The cost is an even bigger issue. As you can see, the cost to build a brand new nuclear power plant, approximately $5.5 billion. It takes 5 to 10 years to build from groundbreaking, assuming that there are no changes in safety regulations during that time. If that happens, then the cost skyrockets because they have to redo half of the stuff they already did. Comparison, solar power to produce the same amount would cost approximately $12 billion and take up 23,000 acres compared to the 610 acres that a single nuclear power plant would need, and that also includes the transmission lines and the mining. Add in wind power, just onshore, you're looking at about $6 billion for 1 gigawatt of continuous power, taking up over 167,000 acres. Then you also add in the operating costs. Nuclear power averaged about 34 cents per megawatt hour per year, or $34 per megawatt power per year. Wind, $45 per megawatt hour, and solar varies depending on how dirty the area is because you have to clean the panels every so often, but averages approximately 25 per year, megawatt hour per year. And yeah, that's pretty cheap until you take into how long each technology lasts. Nuclear power plants designed last 60 plus years for a single plant. Wind, the guarantee on a single turbine, anywhere from 10 to 20 years before it needs to be completely replaced. And the cost, operating cost for those increases year on year as they get older. For solar power, the cheapest one for maintenance, they last maybe 10 years before you have to replace the entire panel, which as that method of replacement, the cost skyrockets and long term it becomes unaffordable. And just to give a visual representation of how much land area that is, the little green dot is one nuclear power plant that generates 1 gigawatt. Orange, solar. Wind. Speaks for itself. Then we have the objections that the nuclear industry or the wind and solar industry come against nuclear power. It's so much hazardous toxic waste that has to be handled. And then there's also the accidents like Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, or Fukushima. Yeah, those are all good points, but they're all based on myths. We ask most people, when you mention nuclear waste to most people, that's what they think of. Homer Simpson, glowing barrels of green sludge. That doesn't actually exist in the real world. Normally, The barrels, any hazardous waste barrels, are containing usually low toxicity stuff you would get mostly from mining tailings, which are needed to produce the wind turbines. Because they actually require quite a bit of mining to do. And all the waste from that, that's what that ends up in. This is what nuclear spent fuel rods look like when they're stored. Each one of those contains about 10 rods surrounded by a couple feet of concrete and lead. And as you can see, you can walk right up to them with no hazards. That's usually where nuclear plants store their spent fuel. Right on site. They don't need any huge facility. And unfortunately, the United States does not reprocess nuclear fuel, unlike other countries, say Russia, France, Japan. Using reprocessing, they can actually reuse about 95 to 96% of all spent fuel rods right now. And that's using technology that hasn't advanced in almost 15 years. Current experimental technology that has been proposed can keep the reuse ratio up to over 99%. And that's fuel that can be used from any reactor and used in almost any other reactor. Which means, typically, for a fuel rod about 10 feet long, usually they're about 2 inches diameter. Your waste, reusable waste, about that big. Very easy to store, and as technology gets even higher, we can use up probably most of that. Otherwise, we just can shoot it up into the sun at some point and repower the sun's energy. Too far. There we go. And just a small diagram of what the reprocessing looks like. Take the spent fuel, spend it, reuse it. Little bit that isn't used can be used in a different type of reactor, which ends up using even less. And once reprocessed, instead of taking 10,000 years to decay away, reduces the decay down to less than 500 years. Great reduction. All right, and then we've got the accidents. Almost everybody has heard of 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, or the recent Fukushima from just a couple years ago. One thing all 3 of these had in common, the accidents were all caused by human error. It was not the design or nothing wrong themselves with the reactors. For 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl, lack of training leading to bypassing and overriding of proper safety protocols. Fukushima was the result of poor design, which never took into consideration an earthquake followed by a tsunami flooding out their backup generators. And in fact, 3 Mile Island and Fukushima, even though all 3 of these released some radioactivity into the atmosphere, into the environment, 3 Mile Island and Fukushima, there was no significant increase in risk from what was released. Chernobyl, yeah, quite a bit released because of the fires that lasted 2 weeks before they could get put out, but all that radiation that exposed to the countryside, that's a Chernobyl exclusion area now. Nature has already taken it back. Most of the wildlife has returned, and that's less than 20 years. It's still somewhat, you eat any of the food there, you're still going to have thyroid problems, but it is working its way out of the system quickly. So, you can either have this, big tracts of solar cells, what you see there, maybe power 20 homes. With the amount of trees and other carbon dioxide absorbing wildlife that's removed to power 20 homes. Or you could go with a nuclear plant, take up probably a little bit more space than that, yet will supply a full city the size of LA. So, talk to your senators, whoever, tell them to approve nuclear power plants, because last one hasn't been built in 20 years. The ones that were recently approved in Georgia have been put on indefinite hold. Thank you. I made a few mistakes in there.